Hello and welcome to MEE Live. Join us as together we take another look at the biggest stories shaping our world.
We are broadcasting live to YouTube and X from Middle East Eye's headquarters here in London.
I'm Mohammed Hassan.
And I'm Matilda Mallinson. Today is Tuesday, the 17th of June. We have so much lined up for you today. Mohammed, can you tell us what is to look forward to?
Where do we begin? So since the last time that we have spoken, a major war has erupted across the Middle East and is now threatening to maybe pull in the rest of the world into it. We don't know what's happening. Things are moving at a breakneck speed and evolving very quickly, and we're all trying to figure out what's happening.
I mean, we broke on Thursday that Israel was imminently looking to attack Iran, according to European officials, some US officials, but I think many are surprised by the rate of escalation in the days since then. Who are we speaking to?
We have a host of voices, experts from across the spectrum. We are starting with Trita Parsi. He is an Iranian American analyst. We will then be speaking to a former UK diplomat, former ambassador to Iran, actually, with Richard Dalton, and he's going to be talking to us about the UK response, the European response, and then we're going to the US. Who are we speaking to there?
So in the US, we want to be finding out, is the US going to get involved in this war? Are they already involved in this war? And we have our reporter tuning in, Sean Matthews, who's broken an exclusive about undisclosed support that the US appears to have given Israel in the first attacks on Friday. And then we will be speaking to YouTuber and Twitch streamer Hassan Piker in the LA about the militancy of the Trump presidency that is on display not just abroad but at home and in his local LA neighborhood.
A packed show. Don't go anywhere. You don't want to miss any of this. Let's start with unpacking where the story begins. Thousands of Iranians are attempting to flee Tehran following warnings from US President Donald Trump for them to leave the capital as the war enters its fifth day. Panic rippled across the city of 10 million in the early hours of Tuesday, with large traffic queues seen flowing out of the city. Israeli airstrikes have for 5 days pummeled infrastructure and residential sites across the country, following an initial large-scale surprise attack on Friday morning, igniting a war between Israel and Iran. Israel has since targeted oil facilities, military bases, Iran's state television broadcaster, as well as a number of military leaders and key figures. These include top IRGC officials, Air Force commanders, security and intelligence chiefs, advisors to the supreme leader, and nuclear scientists. In a speech delivered on Monday, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that Israel was changing the face of the Middle East.
אנחנו חיסלנו את הצמרת הביטחונית של איראן, כולל 3 רמטכ"לים, מפקד חיל האוויר שלהם, 2 ראשי אמ"ן, 2, אתמול חיסלנו עוד אחד, גם של הצבא וגם של משמרות המהפכה. אנחנו פגענו בראש אגף המבצעים שלהם, אנחנו מחסלים אותם אחד אחר השני, גם כאן עוד היד נטויה.
More than 224 Iranians have been killed so far, a large number of them women and children. Having mostly destroyed Iran's air defenses on Friday, Israel now says it has full operational freedom in the skies over Tehran. Iran's military has been responding with force since Friday as well, firing hundreds of drones and ballistic missiles at Israeli cities and attempting to exhaust Israel's supply of anti-air interceptors. 24 Israelis have been killed so far, and daily air raid sirens have repeatedly sent residents into underground shelters. Israel has also reportedly shut down its airspace, including international flights, with many Israelis unable to leave the country. One of Israel's key oil refineries in Haifa was shut down following a direct hit from an Iranian missile on Sunday. Meanwhile, Israeli officials have continued to escalate rhetoric. Israel's energy minister, Eli Cohen, says Israel will destroy 100 buildings in Iran for every one felled in Israel, while Defense Minister Israel Katz warned that residents of Tehran will pay the price if Iran continues to attack, saying Iran would be treated like Beirut. Israel Hayom and Channel 14 news outlets close to the Prime Minister Netanyahu have reported that hitting targets in Tehran and ordering evacuations are part of a plan to pressure Iran's government.
Israel has repeatedly called on the United States to enter the war and help them take out Iran's underground nuclear facilities. Israel has already done extensive damage to Iran's nuclear program, with the UN nuclear watchdog believing 14,000 centrifuges at Iran's Natanz site were badly damaged. But it specifically requires US bunker-busting bombs to hit Iran's Fordo site, a uranium enrichment facility which is buried deep underground. Despite helping Israel prepare militarily for its attacks on Iran, the United States has yet to clarify whether it intends to join the war officially. On Monday, the US Navy began moving its aircraft carrier USS Nimitz from the South China Sea to the Middle East. Iran has warned in the past it would respond to US airstrikes with retaliatory attacks on American military bases in the region, a move that would escalate into a wider regional war. European leaders have urged US President Donald Trump to join calls for de-escalation, but he has so far refused to do so. Now, leaders attending the G7 summit, including French President Emmanuel Macron, suggested to the media that Trump was in fact supportive of a ceasefire agreement between Israel and Iran. However, after leaving the summit early, Trump flatly refuted the claim, saying he was looking for a real end to the war.
You just posted right before we took off that you're not leaving because of a ceasefire. Why are you? Can you elaborate?
We're looking at better than a ceasefire. We're not looking for a ceasefire. I didn't say I was looking for a ceasefire. That was Emmanuel, nice guy, but he doesn't get it right too often. But we're not looking. We're looking for better than a ceasefire.
That's just what specifically is better than a ceasefire? What are you looking for here?
An end, a real end, not a ceasefire. An end.
So something that would be permanent.
Yeah, or giving up entirely. That's okay too.
Are you close there?
Later on Monday evening, Trump took to social media, posting, "Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon," and warned Iranians to immediately evacuate Tehran.
Now, as Israel and Iran dominated headlines over the weekend, Israel intensified its attacks on Gaza, killing dozens of Palestinians per day in relentless airstrikes. On Tuesday alone, more than 80 Palestinians were killed and wounded, hundreds more, in 2 ambushes on 8 centers by Israeli forces in southern Gaza. Israel has killed more than 300 Palestinians at 8 centers since the launch of a new militarized distribution system in May. Forces have repeatedly fired on thousands of starving Palestinians packed into small, fenced-off areas. UN spokespeople have called these distribution centers a death trap and called for investigations into the attacks. Israel has also attacked the last remaining fiber optic route connecting Gaza on Thursday, cutting off all internet and landline telecommunications. Let's dive deeper into what this war means for Iran and how it could escalate further still if the United States decides to enter. Joining us now is Trita Parsi, Iranian-American analyst and executive vice president of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. Trita, welcome to MEE Live.
Thank you so much for having me.
Donald Trump continues to hold the line that Iran needs to come back to the negotiating table and that this war is just a consequence of its refusal to agree to his terms for a nuclear deal. Does this feel like a reflection of the reality of the situation?
No, I think what happened is that talks are actually moving in the right direction up until the moment when Trump adopted the Israeli position of zero enrichment. What the US had tried for 20 years, it absolutely produced nothing. The Israelis knew that that would cause an impasse in the talks. And then once that impasse occurred and Trump started to lose patience, they pushed him hard to say, let us go in militarily and soften the Iranians so that they can come back to the table. Knowing very well that, of course, the Iranians would fight back And instead of having a return to the table, it would create a scenario in which the Israelis could go back to the US and say, actually, you need to come into the war to finish this. And that happened within 24 to 48 hours after the Israelis started attacking Iran. So I think this is something that Trump caused to himself by acquiescing to the Israeli position of zero enrichment. It's the same position that John Bolton and Mike Pompeo convinced him to take in his first term, which also led to nothing but a stalemate. Now, keep in mind, talks were scheduled for Sunday. It's not that the Iranians walked away from the table. It's the Israelis who bombed the table, blew it up, and they did so with a yellow and a green light from Trump.
Now, Israel has not really kept secret its intentions or its desire to start a full-scale war with Iran. We saw last year those two attempts by Netanyahu to lure Iran into a confrontation. Now, despite this, Iran has taken over the last 5 days a number of deeply painful hits to its military, its air defenses, and more importantly, its intelligence. How did it find itself so vulnerable to attack?
I think that's a great question, and it's really good question as to why the Iranians were so nonchalant about the risk of the Israelis attacking, mindful of the fact that it was so clearly signaled that there was a high risk that they would do so. I think the Iranians thought that because Trump had said he wanted talks on Sunday, the Israelis would not attack before Sunday. I think that was a very commonly held view everywhere, including amongst many U.S. allies. And this is part of the reason why I think the Iranians think that the U.S. and Trump was completely complicit in all of this, that they deliberately lulled Iran into thinking that talks were coming, and then they bombed, and then having the audacity to afterwards saying, why did the Iranians walk away from the table? They need to come back to the table.
This war has expanded rapidly over the last 5 days, and attempts by Iran's government to de-escalate have largely been ignored. What options does it have now?
Well, first of all, I think the de-escalation calls are coming from regional states because they're terrified of the consequences of a regional war and the devastation that would inflict on the entire region. It is not coming from Western states in a credible way. If you want to have de-escalation, but you start off your statements by saying that Israel has a right to defend itself, even though it started a war of aggression, then you have negated everything else you're saying in that sentence in that statement after that sentence. And moreover, they're condemning the Iranians, and they're even saying that today the German chancellor said that Israel is doing Europe's and the West's dirty work for it. I mean, those are clear endorsements of what the Israelis are doing. You cannot claim that you are looking for de-escalation with statements of that kind.
And in the background, of course, Israel has been lobbying aggressively, both privately and also in public, for the U.S. to enter the war and help it take out the Fordo uranium enrichment facility and maybe even go further towards something like regime change. How would the situation evolve for Iran if the U.S. does decide to take that step and officially joins the war?
If the U.S. steps in to the war officially in a way that is no longer deniable by the Iranians, then the most likely scenario is that the Iranians decide that they have no choice but to fight back, and that they will then start targeting U.S. bases throughout the region, traffic in the Persian Gulf. There will probably be attacks against U.S. troops and embassies by other militias in Iraq, for instance. So we will see a widening of the war. I don't think the Iranians will win such a war, but the question is how much damage will they inflict on the U.S. and on the region? And will that cause others to step in and really pressure for the war to end, or will it perhaps lead to a scenario in which Trump cuts the war short, as he did in Yemen, even though he did not achieve anything? These are all terrible scenarios. At the end of the day, the Iranians will lose, the region will lose. I think the U.S. will lose to a very large extent. The only potential benefit factor of all of this is Israel.
And Trump seems to be debating his America First policy with some people in his own base, many of whom are angry at the suggestion that the U.S. could enter a war against Iran. There are, of course, more hawkish voices surrounding Trump that have long waited for this exact scenario to unfold. Whose voice is louder right now, and who is Trump actually listening to?
For the last week or so, it's very clear that he's been listening to not his own base, but to more traditional hawkish American Republican conservatives, and who many of them were never Trumpers recently. So in the America First camp, there's a strong sense of betrayal, not for the decision to go into war now, because that hasn't started yet, but simply for the decision of giving Israel a green or a yellow light. That is enough to have infuriated the America First base. So I can only imagine what it will be if this actually leads to the U.S. itself entering the war, having large number of American casualties in that war.
And finally, we saw this tweet from Trump that we just saw on the screen that came really late last night and caused immediately a panic across the hearts of people in Tehran who have already been inundated with aerial bombardment over the last couple of days. What are ordinary Iranians feeling in such a fraught moment like this?
I think most people are in a complete state of shock. No one expected this. Everyone understood that there was always a risk of war hanging in the background. But because talks were going on, diplomacy was happening, they were even supposed to happen 2 days after this attack. I think most people thought that this is still somewhat distant. The risk is there, but it's somewhat distant. That, I think, has shocked them. I think they've been shocked in the manner that the Israelis have done this, attacking apartment buildings, hospitals, the TV station, city centers. They blew off 5 car bombs in Tehran. If Iran had a team of intelligence officers in Tel Aviv who blew up 5 cars with car bombs yesterday, the West would correctly condemn that as terrorism. But in this case, there's complete silence. And of course, I think they're shocked to see that at least in the beginning, Iran's defenses were simply asleep. The air defenses were not even on. And that, of course, has also generated a tremendous amount of anger against the government. But I think that's been overrun by the anger against Israel.
Trita Parsi, Executive Vice President of the Quincy Institute, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Leaders of the world's top economies met at the G7 summit yesterday, but they failed to convince U.S. President Donald Trump to call for a de-escalation in the Israel-Iran war. Among them was British Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer, who has over the last few days sent RAF fighter jets to the region for contingency support, likely to protect the UK's own military assets in the region. He has so far refused to answer questions about whether or not Britain would support Israel militarily and maintained that his message for now is de-escalation. But on Sunday, Chancellor Rachel Reeves reaffirmed Britain's position that Israel had a right to defend itself and said the UK had long been concerned about Iran's nuclear capabilities. Now, this echoes identical remarks we've seen and heard from many European leaders over the last few days, including EU President Ursula von der Leyen, who tweeted that Iran was the main source of regional instability. So is there really any hope for de-escalation in this current moment if European leaders are unwilling to exert any real pressure on Israel or the US? Joining us now is Sir Richard Dalton, former senior British diplomat and the UK's ambassador to Iran from 2003 to 2006. Sir Richard, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
What do you make of the UK's response to the war so far?
Well, there's obviously a lot more behind the scenes than appears on the surface. On the surface, it's weak. The emphasis on de-escalation is a buzzword now. It's not really happening, is it? And what we need is a ceasefire. The Prime Minister, I have no doubt, was working with his colleagues in the G7 summit to try and get some more flexibility out of the American position. And we are actually at a rather interesting juncture. I mean, I expect you want to ask for it at some point, but I can talk a little bit about how I see the American position evolving if you wish.
Well, let's talk about that then. We are at this precipice where we could see the United States go into a war, and that could escalate the situation drastically. What would the UK's position be if this were to happen? Would it be obligated to follow its ally that it's been attempting to try and see and forge stronger relations with over the last couple of months? Would it be obligated to follow it into war?
It would not be obligated politically, in security terms, or morally. This is not the British fight. I think there's a lot of sympathy for Israel in the British Parliament, for example. and there may be in the British government, although I have no direct evidence of that. But I think that our Prime Minister and his colleagues will be guided by British interests, and I can't see any circumstances in which it would be in the British interest to get involved in this fight. But why I think that we're at an inflection point in the US position is that it's clear that the United States wants to get back into a negotiation with Iran. And it appears that there's something of a difference opening up between Israel and the United States. It's not been commented on yet, but we've just heard on the BBC the Israeli defense minister talking in terms of unchanged objectives. He said that regime change wasn't objective, but that they want to take action to severely damage what he called the plan to eliminate the state of Israel. Of course, no such plan exists, but that's what he said. He also talked in terms of severely damaging the missile program and the nuclear program. Now, it looks to me as though they've done serious damage already, but we don't know whether they think they have done enough serious damage. And we don't know what the United States' position on that is. Does the United States want to see more damage done? Or do they want to see an early ceasefire achieved by Iranian surrender on the issues that held up a negotiated settlement in the last round of talks? I think that there's a potential happy ending in the sense that there ever can be a happy ending after a war, but the Iranians aren't going to surrender what they see as their right to enrich on their soil. They are, however, I believe, prepared to agree a whole series of measures to further diminish the slight risk that nuclear materials might be diverted for military purposes, as they did in the JCPOA in 2015. And I think they might also be willing to send away or blend down under supervision their existing stocks of 60% enriched uranium. I think they would commit themselves to only enriching in future to 3.5%, as they did in the JCPOA. And they might even be prepared to consider a moratorium on any enrichment. So to complete the handover of Fordo to being a research center rather than a production center, and of course to bring back all the JCPOA type controls under IAEA execution. Now, sensible people think that a package like that, restoring the high degree of assurance given by the JCPOA, would make sense. But if Trump is still stuck on the aim of eliminating entirely Iranian enrichment capability, we might see them holding out for the position which defeated a good outcome to the talks in the last round. And we might even see acquiescence in Israel's apparent request that the United States use its unique capabilities to have a go at destroying Fordo. So for all these reasons, there's a lot in play which is not anywhere near the surface. It could be positive, it could be more of the same negative, and we could see the war go on.
I'm glad that you mentioned sensible minds and sensible voices. We just saw at the G Summit yesterday the world's most powerful leaders appearing unable to lay any groundwork with Donald Trump, the US president, regarding de-escalation. How dangerous is this moment, and do we have the clear heads to help us navigate through it?
I've got no inside knowledge, so I can't give you real guidance on that point. The question of restricting and limiting and monitoring the Iranian nuclear program took 2 years plus to negotiate last time, during an atmosphere of goodwill. Now, it took the involvement of the most senior nuclear official on the Iranian side and on the US side. It took the establishment of personal relationships of trust between John Kerry, the senior negotiator, and the then Iranian foreign minister, the senior negotiator on the Iranian side. And it took all that time because the issues are complex. You can achieve a high level of assurance that there will be no Iranian nuclear weapon ever if you are prepared to go through these hoops. And the reason why we don't have any confidence that the United States is willing to do that again is that President Trump, one, is in a hurry, two, appears to have very little understanding of the subtleties and intricacies of a negotiation on assurance of non-proliferation of nuclear weapons, and three, is under the sway of Israel. So for those reasons, I am very seriously worried about the situation. I don't think he wants to launch straight into a military action alongside Israel. He's holding that out as a threat, as a way to try and see whether, to use American words, Iran is now sufficiently on its knees to give to the United States what it withheld at the last round of negotiations in Oman.
Now, speaking about Israel and the Israeli government, for the last 2 years, it has appeared in a large way that Israel is dictating the pace of events in the Middle East and dictating the response that we've seen from its allies in the West. And certainly, if you were to rewind the clock a week, you would have seen the UK and the EU issuing some of the harshest statements against the Israeli government that we have seen in a very long time, only for those statements to be retracted or at least kind of replaced by this mantra that we've heard time and time again: Israel has a right to defend itself, even when in this case it is clear that Israel has initiated a war, a conflict with Iran. Why is it, in your opinion, that its strongest allies, the UK, the EU, have not been able to rein Israel in?
No one is able to rein Israel in because they have the backing of the United States for whatever the Israeli government chooses to do. I mean, going back in history, there have been times when the United States used pressure in addition to diplomatic persuasion. When I first got to Jerusalem as Consul General in 1993, we were in the wake of the effort by James Baker, then Secretary of State in the United States, to get Israel to be serious about limiting settlement expansion. And the United States put a financial cap on its assistance to Israel, deducting from that assistance the amount that Israel was spending on settlements beyond the agreed level of settlement at that time. I mean, how wonderful it was to have a US Secretary of State who was prepared to say things every time I come to this country, I find that Israel has set up a new settlement, announced a new move against the Palestinian people. I mean, he was prepared to show a little form in resisting Israel. But since then, the only instances that I'm aware of serious influence on Israel has been the refusals of Presidents Obama and Trump and Biden, I believe all three, but I don't know that for certain, to countenance this kind of attack that Israel has just conducted at an earlier stage, because those presidents at that time believed in the possibility of something better than a war. Now, since then, of course, Netanyahu has obtained more leverage rather than less over the United States, and Israel is more of a law unto itself. And as you rightly say, other Western countries have been incredibly limp in not holding Israel to account. I mean, it's incredible to me, after discussion of it for 30 years, that Britain still allows products from the settlements into our jurisdiction. I mean, we are full of mixed messages. And we are full of mixed messages because we are too subservient to the United States. Now, there are some good reasons for that. I mean, it's a pretty difficult job pursuing British interests where they intersect with American activity or American interests under a president like Mr. Trump. It's hard enough at any time. But the desire to be seen not on the wrong side of Mr. Trump happens to be a very powerful motive. And I think people whose only concern is trade and investment will be admiring of the way the British team of Prime Minister, Secretary of State for Trade and Industry, and Ambassador in Washington have conducted the relationship in order to obtain the trade agreement that we have, mitigating the harm which the United States would otherwise have done to our economy.
Sir Richard, finally,
Maybe Macron.
I wonder if you could reflect briefly on your time spent in Iran as ambassador. What was your sense about what Iranians wanted from not only Britain, but from Europe and from the United States and from the West in general?
Depends who you're talking to. The regime obviously wanted us to soft pedal the diplomatic effort which the European Union was making at the time on 4 principal topics: nuclear non-proliferation, human rights, the Middle East peace process, and terrorism. I mean, those were the big topics every time a British minister met an Iranian minister. More widely in society and elsewhere, I'm including in society, other government officials, they were very keen that we should build up cooperation with Iran in areas which were non-controversial. Culture, to some extent, until Ahmadinejad came along and put a stop to that. Drug cooperation, regional security, the consequences of the invasion of Iraq. There was masses to talk about and masses of overlap in our interests. Subsequent to the toughening of the Iranian position by Ahmadinejad and Khamenei in 2005 and 2006, it became progressively harder and harder to have any sensible dialogue with the Iranians. There were times when they wouldn't receive the British ambassador. And now, of course, one dominant motive in Whitehall, I believe, although this is supposition on my part, is the sense that in addition to having supported the wrong people in Syria, Lebanon, and Gaza, to some degree in the West Bank, insofar as there's a Hamas presence there, Iran has been on the wrong side of an issue of vital importance to British interests and British security, namely Ukraine. So I think that the general view of Iran has seriously deteriorated since my day, and that's been confirmed in many people's minds by the publicity given to the totally unacceptable efforts by the Iranian security state to get at the lives and welfare of people they disapprove of who are living lawfully in our country, broadcasters, journalists, others whom they might class as dissidents. I mean, Iranian threats, the plots which have had to be stopped by MI5 were real and damaging to the lives, for example, of the marvelous people who run the BBC Persian service. So Iran's view, the view taken of Iran couldn't be worse. And then along comes Israel saying, we have an existential issue with Iran and we've got to take action now. And you get senior politicians saying that action by Israel is warranted. They don't look at the legal issues. It absolutely infuriates me that they won't look at the circumstances in international law when preemptive strike against a potential enemy is lawful and when it is not. Israel's strike was illegal aggression. It's the worst international crime. But we're prepared to talk frankly in those terms about Russia, but no, not about Israel.
Sir Richard Dalton, we really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me.
That is, of course, Sir Richard Dalton, former UK ambassador to Iran. Stay with us as we turn our focus now to the United States, where President Trump is navigating between a war in Iran and a war at home.
Welcome to MEE Live Spotlight, where today we ask, is the US part of this war or not? Since Israel fired the first strikes on Friday, we've had mixed messages out of the White House. Secretary of State Marco Rubio was quick to stress the US was not involved in strikes against Iran. That's to quote. Just a day later, US President Donald Trump said he knew about the attacks, but had called on Israel not to attack Iran until nuclear talks. The Trump administration did, in fact, play a vital role in arming and resupplying Israel's war effort, even while the president was still negotiating with Tehran. 2 days before Israel launched its surprise attack, the US quietly sent hundreds of laser-guided Hellfire missiles to its ally. The CIA was briefed as early as April about Israel's attack plan, which reportedly impressed the Trump administration, and key to Israel's mission on Friday, the US helped modify their F-35 fighter jets to fly longer distances without refueling. This allowed Israel to penetrate targets deep within Iranian territory on Friday. Here to bring us the story is MEE's political reporter, Sean Matthews. Welcome to the show, Sean. Your investigation suggests...
Thanks for having me on.
Your investigation suggests that the US could have been deeply involved in preparations for the attack on Iran that we saw last Friday. How much did the US know, and how much did they help?
Yeah, I mean, look, as you said, we reported that the U.S. was briefed on Israel's battle plans in Iran throughout April and May. So the U.S. clearly knew what Israel's plans were, the precision strikes they had in mind. They knew the target systems analysis that Israel had laid out to hit kind of the systems that surround Iranian nuclear sites, like the energy grid, water supplies, all of these things, air defense systems. So I think there's very little doubt that the U.S. knew about Israel's battle plans. And of course, the U.S. has been supplying Israel with a steady stream of weapons really since the beginning of 7 October, right, 2023. The Hellfire shipment that you mentioned, I thought that was interesting because the story that we got on that was that the U.S. sent those Hellfire missiles to Israel on Tuesday, but that didn't become knowledgeable within wider circles of the administration and U.S. government until Friday. So again, I'm not sure what role the Hellfires directly played in the Israeli attack because these laser-guided weapons are more for precision strikes. But clearly the U.S. was kind of trying to keep it quiet that it was beefing up Israel's military supplies before the attack. Of course, because the U.S. was going to engage in direct negotiations with Iran on Sunday, right? They were supposed to. So there was a steady stream of, U.S. weapons going to Israel as these talks were progressing and as Israel was preparing for the battle plans. The F-35 modifications that you discussed, I think this is the most interesting, and this is what everyone's going to be talking about, I think, in the months and even the years after this conflict. The F-35 is the United States advanced stealth warplane. And it's probably one of the best aircraft there is for fighter jets. But it has one limitation, and that limitation is its range. The F-35's combat range, which means the distance that it can go from the base to the targets that it strikes and back, is about 600 miles, a straight shot, 700 miles. The distance between Israel and Iran at its shortest point is about 1,100 miles one way. So basically, the Israelis have always faced this dilemma with their warplanes, which is that they have to get them from Israel into Iran, and you can do that through really two ways. You refuel them midair, or you find a way to get them to go farther with putting more gas in the tank. And this it's a huge deal for the F-35, right? So Israel's always been constrained for refueling for two reasons. One is military planners say, for a surprise attack like what Israel carried out last week, you don't want to refuel in a combat zone and in a war zone because that could tip off your enemy. It creates too many variables. It's not what you want to do when you're launching a sneak attack. The other issue would have been landing F-35 somewhere in Azerbaijan or in the Gulf states, but we know from our other reporting that Israel really wanted to avoid, at its neighbor's request, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, even Azerbaijan, getting involved in this conflict directly. So those bases, those Gulf bases, air bases that the U.S. maintains, were always going to be closed off to Israel. The issue of the F-35 modification, look, we knew this had been going on for some time, and the Israelis were working on a way to attach basically additional fuel tanks to the F-35s so that they could use up that fuel as they're going towards Iran, drop those tanks somewhere in the desert, and then go into what's called beast mode, which is the stealth mode for F-35s, and attack Iran directly, avoiding all radar. And it's from our sources, that's exactly what the Israelis have done. Aviation magazines and news sites were reporting as early as 2019 that the Israelis were working on this. There was a report in a magazine called Aviationist Magazine in 2021, 2020, that the Israelis were looking into ways, with U.S. help, to modify the F-35 in order to attach these kind of buddy tanks, what they're called, these drop fuel tanks onto the F-35. The problem the Israelis and American engineers face, because the F-35 is produced by Lockheed Martin, it's an American aircraft, is that the entire F-35 is coated in basically radar absorbent technology, so that you can kind of fly in, you can avoid enemy radar. And the sources that we spoke with wouldn't provide all the details, but it seems like the Israelis found a way to attach these buddy tanks on there that would be dropped after they're used up, and have them coated with radar absorbent technologies, and not disrupt the F-35 stealth capabilities. So it's a huge achievement, and it's one that's going to be watched by the Iranians, of course, but especially by the Russians and the Chinese in the future. Much like the war that we saw between, the brief conflict we saw between India and Pakistan, how the Rafale performed and how all these fighter jets performed, this is going to be the same case. I mean, Russia and China are going to be watching this. So it's a huge strategic technological accomplishment for the Israelis and the Americans.
So the US appears to have provided the necessary technology for Israel's attack plan, but Israel is also highly dependent on the US for its air defenses. This centers around its notorious Iron Drone system, which has so far blocked a majority of Iran's missiles and drones. How long can Israel continue to restock its defenses?
Yeah, look, Matilda, I think let's just step back, though, and explain to viewers what Israel's air defenses are, because I think there's still some confusion about this. Israel has a three-tiered air defense system. So short-range missiles and rockets that are fired are taken down by the Iron Dome. The next stage of kind of broader mid-range ballistic missiles are taken out by a system called aerial sling. And then the third kind of highest tier level air defense system Israel has is the Arrow 2 and 3 interceptor system. And that's what's being used right now. So it's not the Iron Dome. The Iron Dome was really used intensely during the early stages of the conflict with Hamas, kind of shorter rockets that were being fired into Israel. This is the Arrow 2 and Arrow 3 system, which is being used. And our sources tell us that, yeah, the Israelis are running extremely low on this. And we know also that the Americans had to throw a lot of air defense systems into the theater of operations in the lead up to this attack, and currently are doing it now. So there's a THAAD battery stationed in Israel, at least one that we know about, which has been widely reported, a missile defense battery that the U.S. operates. There's also Patriot air defense systems in the region. Our U.S. officials that we've spoken to and other outlets have all reported that these air defense systems have been activated. And also, I think interestingly, the U.S. is also in the Eastern Mediterranean deployed battleships that are shooting down these missiles as well with Standard Missile 3 missile interceptors. So the SM missile interceptor is also being used. So the Americans have stepped up the last couple of days. They've helped the Israelis shoot down the Iranian ballistic missiles that are coming in. I think what's notable now is the last few days, the Iranian attacks in terms of the volume of ballistic missiles that are firing are decreasing. So one former U.S. official that I spoke with explained it to me this way, is that the Israelis are rushing to hit the Iranian trucks and transport vehicles that transport the ballistic missiles in order to take them out in Iran because they have a shortage of interceptors. So basically, in order to make up for this interceptor shortage, they're trying to hit as many missiles on the ground in Iran and as many of the vehicles transporting them as they can.
Thank you for explaining that distinction for us. Now let's talk about Iran and whether Iran can retaliate. We've just seen the US move an aircraft carrier from the South China Sea to the Middle East, flanked by a squadron of warships. The US appears to be moving to protect its own military bases in the region that could be vulnerable to targeting by Iran. Is this really an option for Iran?
I think it's the last option Iran wants to take. I mean, Iran, even at this stage, despite the heavy hits they're taking from the Israelis, they have refrained from hitting, first of all, energy infrastructure in the Gulf states and American military bases, because they know that that would give Trump the excuse to launch direct strikes on really high-value targets that the Israelis are not able to hit, like Fordow, the nuclear plant. So the Iranians are very, very hesitant to strike directly at the Americans. We know that. There's just a report actually saying that the U.S. had withdrawn, though, 2 bases in northeast Syria. So they closed down 2 bases today, it looks like. So the U.S. is also kind of, they're pulling troops out of this kind of crossfire. And yeah, the Nimitz has been deployed from the Far East to the Middle East. I think that's a really important step. I mean, given the tensions with China, especially around Taiwan, the U.S. is not likely to pull out the aircraft carrier from the Asian, Far East Asia, and send it to the Middle East unless it's very serious about potentially considering a direct strike on Iran. And also to be there to protect U.S. troops. But yeah, I mean, the Iranians, they really want to refrain from striking U.S. forces, and they are holding their fire. And also, those are easy targets, right? The bases in the Gulf, they're a lot closer than Israel. They're lightly defended compared to Israel. So if the Iranians wanted to strike those bases, they could probably do it despite the hits that they're taking, but they have held off on doing it. And that's because they don't want to drag the U.S. into this conflict. That's what they're trying to avoid.
And finally, Israel has been lobbying US President Donald Trump to enter the war, primarily to help it target Iran's Fordow underground uranium enrichment plant. What is the significance of this site, and what would it actually mean if Trump agrees?
Yeah, this distinction that the Trump administration keeps trying to make that says we're backing Israel, but we're not in the war. I mean, U.S. officials that I speak with, even high-level defense officials, basically describe the U.S. at this level as a co-belligerent. I mean, it's pretty clear to everybody that the U.S. is, shooting down Iranian ballistic missiles to defend Israel. So that distinction about, whether the U.S. joins directly in strikes or not, I think it's becoming very thin. And even U.S. officials admit that the U.S. is a co-belligerent, right? So I don't think anyone's really kind of, taking this legal distinction that the Trump administration is trying to portray too seriously. But clearly the Iranians, they haven't struck the U.S. yet, and that's because the U.S. hasn't struck Iran directly yet. If the U.S. takes out, the Israelis want American help to take out Fordow, the plant, because they don't have the massive ordnance penetrator bombs that are needed. The U.S. has those bombs, and they have the B-2 stealth bombers to take out this plant. Again, it's up to... It's still uncertain whether the Trump administration is going to make this decision or not. Arab Gulf officials that I was speaking with in recent days said that they felt it was more likely than not that the U.S. was going to come in. Before I came on the show, I just saw a social media post from Trump saying that we control the skies over Iran. I was texting a U.S. official before I came on the show just a minute ago asking what he felt that meant. And there are some people that feel that Trump is laying the groundwork for potential U.S. strikes, clearly taking ownership of what he says is this Israeli-American air superiority over Iran. So if the U.S. is going to come in, Trump is kind of signaling, or he's laying the groundwork for that.
Sean Matthews, thank you for joining us.
Thanks.
You can keep up with Sean's reporting on our website, middleeasteye.net. Now, despite behind-the-scenes dealings and contradictory messages coming out of the White House about the extent of US involvement, one thing is clear, and that is that 5 months into Donald Trump's second presidency, his Inauguration Day promise to stop all wars and bring a new spirit of unity has not been realized. The showdown between Israel and Iran is just the latest escalation in global conflict Trump pledged to end. The Gaza ceasefire he claimed as an early foreign policy collapsed within a week. Israel not only resumed airstrikes but launched a ground offensive and starved Palestinians with a 3-month aid blockade. In Ukraine, a conflict Trump bragged he would end in a day, Putin has pressed on with his invasion despite Trump making him major concessions in a failed bid for peace. And last night saw Russia's deadliest strike yet on the Ukrainian capital of Kiev. And in what could have been a scene from Moscow, soldiers, tanks, and robot dogs paraded through Washington, D.C. on Saturday as the president spent his birthday hosting the capital's first military parade in over 3 decades. And it isn't just enemies overseas at whom he's flexing the state's military might. In Los Angeles, clashes between law enforcement officers and locals protesting immigration raids have escalated into 11 days of unrest. Trump deployed thousands of troops and Marines to follow in the wake of ICE officers who were working to arrest quotas of 3,000 people per day. Downtown LA remains under curfew. Yet military crackdown has failed to prevent protests spreading across the US. Saturday's No Kings protest saw rallies in all 50 states. It's a symbol of discontent that has often escalated into violence. In the US, political homicides are on the rise, and police are recording more and more violent threats against people running the country. 2 Democratic lawmakers and their spouses were shot in their homes over the weekend. One couple, Minnesota's Melissa Hortman and her husband, were killed. It's the latest in a string of politically motivated assassinations. Many of these acts of domestic terror and hate have been committed in response to US wars overseas, particularly in Gaza. From Israeli embassy staffers Yaron Lishinsky and Sarah Milgram to 6-year-old Palestinian American Wadi Al-Fayumi, innocent civilians are paying with their lives, and the ocean that has long protected the US from the heat of its forever wars appears to be getting smaller. One American commentating on all this news amid scenes of domestic unrest is LA-based political streamer Hassan Piker. I spoke to him this afternoon about the intensifying climate in the US. So, President Trump, the peacemaker, from where you're sitting, how is that going?
It's definitely not going great. I mean, I never really believed that Donald Trump was actually going to be a peacemaker. I have a firm commitment to the theory that American foreign policy is uniparty. That's part of the reason why you're hearing Brett McGurk and even someone from the Kamala Harris campaign as recently as last week talk about how they are either directly aligned with Donald Trump in terms of how hard they would defend Israel, or even trying to outflank Donald Trump in terms of how fast they would defend Israel. Even though Israel has conducted this first strike against Iran amidst this Iran denuclearization negotiations that are ongoing. So yeah, Donald Trump was also a liar when he said he was going to end these wars. He said day one, Israel-Palestine, it's over. Day one, Ukraine, Russia, it's over. Now, of course, with respect to dealing with foreign adversaries like Russia, that's a sovereign nation. It's a lot more difficult than to actually cause Israel to stop its ethnic cleansing campaign in Gaza. Israel is not only a client state, but Israel is basically an extension of American foreign intervention in the region. It's basically an American state. We give 70% of all the defensive and offensive weapons to Israel since October 7. Israel would not be able to do this ethnic cleansing campaign in Gaza without our go-ahead and our knowledge and our munitions and our political cover. And Donald Trump could have, quite literally could have, stopped this at any moment, just as Biden had the same opportunity to stop this with one simple phone call, and he chose not to do so. So it's not surprising that Trump has used this negotiations process, this denuclearization agreement negotiations process, where the American envoys have pushed for maximalist positions, claiming that Iran cannot have any nuclear capabilities at all for civic power grids, that Iran cannot enrich any uranium whatsoever, and then using that negotiations process to allow Israel to have some kind of shelter, some kind of cover to tactically strike first amidst these ongoing negotiations. That doesn't seem like a peaceful negotiator at all. I think America is showing the world over and over again, just like with what Steve Witkoff did with Hamas, as they cut a backdoor deal with Hamas to release American-Israeli occupying force soldier Idan Alexander, with nothing but just assurances that America would potentially be a better party to deal with than Israel. We keep refusing to follow through on our commitments and showing every other party in the region that we are unstable, we're dangerous, and we're just as violent as Israel is.
But how does that fit with the MAGA mantra of America first? There was this campaign pledge to put domestic interests before all other interests. Is that compatible with this hawkish picture you're painting of a US that's still playing its hand in regime changes overseas?
I mean, it's just lying. I don't know how else to describe it. Politicians lie all the time, and Donald Trump clearly is a tremendous liar. He lies every waking moment of every single day. And yes, the supposedly isolationist policies that the Donald Trump administration was supposed to implement, that never came to fruition in the first term. He was in isolation in the first term, even though he falsely presented his record as not starting any new wars, even though he bombed the Middle East in spectacular fashion, greatly escalated even Obama's drone wars, as a matter of fact, which was shocking because Obama was the drone king, and yet he still presented himself as a peaceful dove, as he did in 2016 successfully against Hillary Clinton. He presented himself once again as a peaceful dove after years of conflict under the Biden administration. He said he was going to be the reasonable guy who comes in, the peaceful dove who comes in and actually finally puts an end to all these endless wars. And now we are saber rattling against a regional power that America and Israel both have salivated at the prospect of dismantling for the past 30, 40 years at this point. And I do feel like, judging by the statements coming from Israeli officials, this is their final battle, the final step in America's grand design in the region. It would have happened with every other president as well. Maybe not in the same exact ways. I think Donald Trump has a different style and a different way of speaking, where he's more blunt, he's more honest about America's ambitions. In many instances, there's a brutal honesty to the cruel way in which he speaks about America's allies and America's adversaries, America's enemies. But when it comes down to it, yeah, he lied to his voters about being an isolationist. There's no isolationist American presidency. There's no anti-war party in this country. There's no anti-war party. There are very few real anti-war politicians in this country. I think the military-industrial complex is far too powerful for that. And I think imperialism is far too important as a mechanism to continue capitalism. And America is the defender of global capitalism, finance capitalism, and imperialism is a necessity under that structure.
Okay, so no such thing as an anti-war presidency, and no such thing as an anti-war party in America. What about the American people? Do they want war?
Yes and no. I think a lot of Americans don't actually understand that endless war is a part of the reason why we get to have cheap oil and numerous other benefits, as opposed to like how poor the material conditions and living standards are in the global South. That's the brutal truth of it all. But it's good that Americans don't recognize that, because if they did, I think a lot more would be salivating for additional war. Americans fancy themselves to be anti-war for the most part, and the reason why is because they don't like seeing coffins draped with the American flag, and therefore war is a constant, but it's just constantly happening over there. It's not happening to us over here. America has tremendous proximity from the impact of these wars as well. Part of the reason why we were so dominant after World War II, because our factories and our robust industrial base was not destroyed, was not eviscerated. So because of that proximity, our media, and because our media is constantly justifying endless war, we get to basically have our cake and eat it too. Americans get to feel like they want to be peacekeepers. They feel like they have to be the world police, but also simultaneously they get to talk about how little appetite they have for war, which is why they vote for a guy like Donald Trump, who presents himself falsely as a peaceful dove, as an anti-war candidate. Having said that, how much of that is honest, I don't know. I think we're a very malleable population. We're very easy to dupe, very easy to influence. And therefore, I think all it would take is for Trump to come out and be like, America first actually means Iran can't have nuclear weapons. No country can be sovereign. And that means like we have to send some corn-fed boys from Nebraska on a cruiser to potentially get destroyed by Shahed drones. That's what America First means to me now, and that's what America First is going to mean to a lot of people tomorrow. So who knows? Who knows how well he'll be able to sell it? But I think we are a very heavily propagandized nation. There's a lot of nascent and reactivated Islamophobia in this country, especially Islamophobia that had a real consequential go at it in terms of propaganda since the war on terror, since 9/11, and I think we've reactivated that nascent Islamophobia since October 7, 2023 here in this country. So I think that Americans will still, at the end of the day, find a way to say, no, it's actually fine if we bomb Iran. On that front, actually, I will say we've been bombing Yemen. The American government continued Operation Prosperity Guardian, basically. It exchanged hands from the Biden administration to the Trump administration. Tremendously costly, tremendously murderous. Once again, completely illegal. We're just violating the sovereignty of a foreign nation, this time Yemen. It's almost a ritual at this point. Every president has to bomb Yemen. And that was not even talked about in American media. The only thing that they talked about is like why they revealed that they were going to bomb Yemen to a journalist, who I say journalist in air quotes. He's the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic. He's a Hosberist and also a propagandist for the State Department. But like that was Signalgate. That was the real point of contention. No one was asking like, why are we bombing Yemen? Why is Donald Trump bombing Yemen? What is happening? I thought he was anti-war. What's going on? And I think Americans think, oh, we just have to bomb these other countries all the time. So I think like as long as there's no like boots on the ground invasion, I do think that if America was engaging in like limited striking with its Air Force, as the New York Times, CNN, Fox News, and every outlet is currently fantasizing about with respect to bombing Fordo, the deep underground nuclear facility in Iran. That is only penetrable with American weapons, as far as we know. If they were to do that, I think maybe they could sell it as not really an act of war in the absence of boots on the ground, military invasion in Iran. So that's, I think, what we're gearing towards right now. And there will be a lot of right-wing Trump supporters that will gladly get on board. And I think more importantly than right-wing Trump supporters that will gladly get on board, you'd be shocked at the number of Democrats who will be on board with Trump doing what must be done. I'm not really, liberals saying things like, I'm not really pro-war, but what Donald Trump is doing is defending Israel. And Israel is an incredibly important ally. It's the only moral country in the world in the Middle East, and the only democracy in the Middle East. And Iran is horrible to women, so we have to kill all the women in Iran with American troops. Like that is totally a liberal point of propaganda that I can see from American political commentators and writers, journalists alike. We've already started seeing it.
Now, it is true that, as you say, aggression played out by the American military is often happening abroad. However, there are currently Americans in America who are facing the might of state power. You are, of course, streaming from LA, where there have been almost 2 weeks of protests. The president sent in thousands of Marines and military to squash unrest. He's so far failed to shut it down. As we approach 2 weeks, are things settling? How does this end?
This has been a spectacular escalation as opposed to the first administration, where it's very obvious that the Trump administration is basically punishing blue states and blue cities just for being Democrats and for being liberals and being progressive. the ICE apprehensions and ICE detentions aren't born out of a real issue that we must solve. It's the entire purpose of it is to, from their perspective, is to combat crime. Undocumented migrants are not responsible for a higher percentage of crime per capita than natural-born U.S. citizens are. They do less crime. They're constantly worried about potentially being deported, so it makes sense. They do significantly less crime, as a matter of fact. So the idea, the entire notion of mass deportations is built on a lie that the Democrats never actually counter-messaged against, which was very frustrating to watch. And now there's even more evidence that it's a lie, because Donald Trump is not going after these supposed criminals. They're going to places of work. They're going to factories. They're going to the farms. And they're doing dragnet campaigns on farmhands. They're doing dragnet campaigns on people who are playing a formative role in American commerce, in agricultural production, in construction. And this is very disruptive to the economy, as people had predicted already, myself included, beyond the incalculable human toll and the inhumanity of it all, right? It's because it's depraved to just rip people away from their families and black bag them and possibly ship them off to a slave labor colony in El Salvador named CICOT. They're doing this purely out of spite, and they're doing this purely to satisfy the needs of a white nativist 20% of their voter base that's like really excited at enacting any kind of like racial justice that will make them feel more superior, that will make them feel better, all as a mechanism of distraction that these guys and their living conditions are getting worse and worse year over year. But as long as like the government is actually fighting for this interest that they've created for me by punishing undocumented migrants, someone that's lower than me, I maybe have it better than I ever would under a Democratic leadership. That's the calculation for a lot of these people. Donald Trump came out and said, after Steve Miller said we need 3,000 kidnappings a day, and the ICE deportations greatly escalated after that in Los Angeles. They went to Home Depot in a predominantly Latino neighborhood, and they went to a warehouse as well in the fashion district downtown. Again, lots of Latino workers. They arrested a union leader, the largest union, SEIU is the largest union in California. They arrested the leader, and they're charging him with some ridiculous charges. And they're doing all of this, I guess at this point, 2 weeks ago. And they're doing this simply to prove a point. The idea that they are actually very militant against dealing with this undocumented migration problem, even though no one in California would ever tell you that undocumented migrants are a problem at all. These are people who are, parts of our communities. They're a part of the social fabric here. They're a part of what makes California great, part of what makes Los Angeles awesome. And so, of course, people got very upset. And then last week, Donald Trump came out and said, actually, we should roll back the apprehensions that ICE is doing at places of business like hospitality industry and also the farms. Because business leaders reached out to Trump and were like, what are you doing? You're disrupting our output. You're disrupting commerce. You're not supposed to do this. What are you doing? Stop, detaining my workers. So Donald Trump said, let's pull it back. Well, I thought these guys were all criminals. If they're criminals, why are you going to the courts? If they're criminals, why are you going to the immigration courts and waiting outside of the immigration courts for a guy who is attending his court date because his immigration status is in limbo? If they're criminals, why are you, putting a mask on your face and not even explaining that you're actually a cop, or lying about having a warrant when you only have an administrative warrant but not a judicial warrant, when you want to do an unlawful search and seizure to dupe people into opening their doors for you? If these guys are criminals, why are you going to the graduations of schools to kidnap children? Why are you trying to go to elementary schools to kidnap children so you can hopefully maybe kidnap their families, use them as bait? I think the real criminals here is this administration. They are a criminal administration. The way that they're behaving is insane. It's It's identical to Nazi Germany. And apparently they get really touchy-feely about that. What do you call ICE Gestapo? But that's precisely what they're doing. And now Donald Trump has said he wants to escalate the deportations only in blue states and blue cities. But I thought these Republicans, the people that voted for Donald Trump in red cities, voted for him because they wanted to get these criminal migrants out. So why is he only getting these quote-unquote criminal migrants out in blue cities? Because everybody understands that there is no real problem with undocumented immigration in this country. The real problem with undocumented immigration in this country is that they are simply not being processed, cleared, and authorized as expeditiously as they should be. That's the only problem. The real crime here is the fact that we use and abuse this permanent underclass of laborers without actually offering them the proper clearance, while keeping their immigration status in limbo, because that way they're more malleable and they're easier to discard. And the Trump administration is now using them as a pawn to make a political point, and it's gross and it's disgusting. If that wasn't the case, they'd be deporting undocumented migrants in red states as well. As a matter of fact, they'd probably focus on the red states first. Florida and Texas are the two largest red states with the number of undocumented population beyond California, Illinois, New Jersey, and New York. So why is he not doing these apprehensions in California and in Florida and Texas? Why is he not actually going after Florida and Texas? Because, he knows that this is an unpopular position.
Hassan, you're absolutely right. It is important to highlight misinformation around migrant crime, and studies in the US show that immigrants are consistently 60 to 50% less likely to be incarcerated than US-born. However, as you've indicated, the rhetoric Trump is using has expanded from demonizing undocumented migrants. In the case of LA, he's now describing entire communities, entire populations as criminals. We've seen words to describe the LA protests like riots or insurrection. We're being told that LA is a war zone. You have been on the scene. Are these descriptions accurate?
I mean, I'm in Los Angeles right now, and I live here. I love the city. It's a massive city. So the idea that like the entire city is a war zone is so ridiculous. I mean, this city is larger than larger than some countries even, right? So no, it's a tiny, minuscule part of Los Angeles, in the heart of downtown Los Angeles, where there's any sort of like instability whatsoever. It's not riots. It's not like a war zone. That's all completely made up. It is overwhelmingly peaceful. And it's overwhelmingly peaceful until the police escalate, until police start, brutalizing the protesters, shooting them with rubber bullets, and shooting them with tear gassing them, macing them. I've experienced this every single time I've been out. We walk up, it's a perfectly peaceful protest. People are demonstrating outside in front of a police line, and then the cops decide it's time. And, they take the batons out and they start brutalizing people. And of course, in the process of that brutalization, like, do some people get mad and maybe throw a bottle of water, like a half empty bottle of water they picked off the ground against the cop with riot gear on? Sure, it does happen. But that's nothing. If that's something that you can get mad at, then you should be extremely upset at the fact that these guys that are paid for by taxpayers are using chemical weapons and have all the gear that the taxpayers paid for, and using chemical weapons that we paid for on us for exercising our First Amendment rights. It's completely ridiculous. Like the asymmetry is so glaringly obvious. If you're there, you see it. That's precisely why I go to these protests, and that's precisely why I film them. I don't want to be beyond the police line, as mainstream press usually is, because I feel like it reflects their position a little bit differently, and it I think shows people a very different reality of what these protests actually look like, as opposed to being on the opposing side and maybe even sometimes getting shot with stun grenades, with flashbangs and tear gas, as I have. But it's important to show that these protests are peaceful until police escalate, and even then it's not like anything crazy. I mean, I ate a bunch of tear gas. I got flashbanged the first day, and I walked like 3 blocks and went to Little Tokyo to eat ice cream after the protest was over, right? So that's not, you can't say that like riots are taking place in Los Angeles on fire if I can just like get into an Uber and go home, or if I can just like walk 3 blocks down, like literally 3 blocks, not that far away, and go and enjoy a nice ice cream from a Japanese store called Somi Somi. Like that's not, it's a little bit different, I think.
Yeah.
And there is no need for the Marines to be deployed, nor the National Guard. But of course, that's just, once again, for pure politics.
Nevertheless, from the outside, it seems to be a fairly volatile climate in the US. And there are cases where political unrest leads to acts of criminal violence. This weekend saw 2 more political assassinations in a string of assassinations. Protests have spread across 50 states. And now, in the midst of all this, is the question about whether the US is about to go to war with Iran. How does it feel to be in the US at the moment?
I mean, it's chaotic. It's the end times. It feels like we are living through a dying empire, and a dying empire is always going to do a lot of violent things in its last breath. So that's what all of this instability actually is. I think America is trying to desperately come to terms with the reality that it is no longer going to be the hegemonic superpower, that China has become a true global competitor and is slated to continue growing. And I think in that process, we're trying to do, to the best of our ability, we here in the United States are trying to pack up the entire Middle Eastern region finally. And that is going to, of course, be a tremendously bloody affair. And that's what's unfolding right now. We're just getting our ally or getting our extension in the region, Israel, to do tremendous damage. And hopefully, from the estimation of the State Department, of course, it's not my assessment, but the State Department hopes that they can potentially destabilize Iran enough, and then maybe even implement a puppet state there so that they can move on to decoupling this oil-rich region from China as a major energy provider, so that they can weaken China's position around the globe.
End times. Hassan Piker, thank you for joining us here on Middle East Eye.
Thank you for having me.
That is all the time that we have. Packed show today. Lots of really strong voices. You can watch all of them if you missed any of it on our YouTube page, MEE Live. And of course,
we want to hear from you.
Please get in touch.
We've had lots of different viewpoints about what is going to happen and how people are affected by what's unfolding now. We want to hear yours. You can reach out to us via social media at Middle East Eye or email meelive@middleeasteye.net.
There's going to be plenty more coverage of the Israel-Iran war over the coming days. So please stay tuned right here. Hit the notification bell so you can know exactly when we're going live. It happens on Tuesdays and Thursdays right here from the studio, 12 p.m. Eastern Time, 5 p.m. British Standard Time.
See you then.